The lands that are explored are very important to the plot of the novel. The first is Lilliput, the land of 6-inch tall people, where the protagonist and narrator, Gulliver, is a giant. He awakes on the island of Lilliput after a ship crash, only to discover that he has been tied down by thousands of Lilliputians. This key plot event is famous from Gulliver's travels and starts off the action in the novel. Even though the Lilliputians attack Gulliver with arrows, he chooses to be peaceful and not use force to defeat them. After deciding whether or not to defeat them with strength, Gulliver says, "Fortune disposed otherwise of me." This demonstrates the tension of power versus peace. It also connects to Atticus Finch from Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, as Atticus stands by his morals to fight with his head instead of his fists. Gulliver does the same throughout his visit to Lilliput, where he could easily kill hundreds of Lilliputians by simply stepping on them. Given their small size, the Lilliputians also appear to be small-minded in the way that they govern their country. For instance, politicians are appointed depending on their rope dancing skills rather than intellect. Even after discovering that the Lilliputians intend to pass a law to rip out Gulliver's eyes, he simply leaves the island peacefully. He goes to Blefuscu, a nearby island, with hope that they will help him find a way home. During Gulliver's time in Lilliput, he hears of a war between Lilliput and Blefuscu. He hears that the two nations used to be one, but then uprisings began about which side to crack the egg on. Obviously, this is a laughable reason to begin a war. This could be a symbol for Swift's views on the Protestant versus Catholic rebellions in England at the time the novel was written. Eventually, Gulliver finds his way home to England, only to depart again for another voyage. He arrives in Brobdingnag, which is the opposite of Lilliput. Here, Gulliver is tiny compared to the Brobdingnagians, who are giants. When he first arrives, Gulliver is found by a farmer. This farmer appoints his daughter to be the little nurse. Gulliver addresses this girl as Glumdalclitch, and she stays with him for the remainder of the travels to Brobdingnag, even when he is sold to the Queen. Glumdalclitch becomes very important as she teaches him the Brobdingnag language, cares for him, and keeps him from harm. In fact, throughout every land traveled, Gulliver must learn a new language. He is described at the beginning of the novel as being an educated linguist and must use these skills frequently. This creates the motif of unfamiliar languages. Gulliver often speaks to the King of Brobdingnag, and they usually compare Brobdingnag to England. During these conversations, Gulliver discovers that the Brobdingnagians as a whole are a very narrow-minded people with no thoughts of advancing in society. Gulliver learns a lot about the differences and similarities between the two nations' governments. The author uses this to tell the reader about British politics, as he does frequently throughout the book, so the theme of British politics is recognized. Another theme explored during Gulliver's time in Brobdingnag is isolation in society. Even though Gulliver is surrounded by people, he is mostly isolated, as he is never treated as an equal. He is rather treated as a freak of nature. Gulliver's next trip is to a group of islands, notably Laputa, the floating island that hovers over the land of Balnibarri. The constant traveling shows the theme of exploration, adventure, and discovery. In this land, Gulliver encounters the Laputans, an irrational people. They cannot focus for over a minute and are obsessed with astronomy. One of their irrational fears is that the Earth will be swallowed up by the sun at any moment. The protagonist visits an academy where scientists and philosophers attempt to better society. However, their experiments are faulty and do not appeal to Gulliver. For example, they try to build a house from the roof down, which obviously would not work. The Laputans are thus a symbol for the author's opinions on useless and unproven theories. Gulliver says he is ill-entertained and that these unhappy people were proposing schemes for persuading monarchs to choose favorites. All of the experiments in the Academy hint at a symbol for Swift's more traditional views on knowledge. Their lack of common sense shows the theme, the limits of knowledge. Gulliver feels very out of place in Laputa. The Laputans treat him as a burden. He narrates that he is very far their inferior. This is very similar to the society in To Kill a Mockingbird, where tensions between white and black people are high, and blacks feel inferior to whites. Because of Gulliver's neglect in Laputa, he travels to a nearby island called Glubdubdrib, the island of sorcerers. The governor can temporarily bring back the dead and does so for Gulliver. Gulliver chooses to have Alexander the Great, Hannibal, and many others brought back. These are all allusions to ancient history. He soon travels back to England, then once again sets out on a new voyage. This time, the inhabitants are like no other he has seen before. Gulliver begins to live among horses, called the Wenhams. They have a language of their own, live in houses, and have a government driven by reason. Gulliver comes to understand them, and becomes the possession of a great Wenham, whom he calls his master. They often discuss the Wenham society versus that of England. He soon discovers that the Wenhams are an intelligent race with no need for war or dishonesty. For instance, they get extremely confused when Gulliver tells them a story of his travels and think he is saying the thing which was not, for they have no concept of lying. One could argue that Swift uses the Wenhams as a symbol for his ideal society, as they have no war, lies, or ignorance. Gulliver clearly admires this about the Wenhams. Also living on this island are the Yahoos. They are a filthy, barbaric race. They are constantly fighting, stealing, and other disgraceful actions. The Wenhams frequently compare Gulliver to a Yahoo, which offends him. The Yahoos are character foils to the Wenhams as they stand for honesty and reason, whereas the Yahoos are driven by ignorance and dishonesty. So, while the Wenhams could be seen as a symbol for an ideal society, the Yahoos are quite the opposite. They are explored as Swift's views on humanity and would be the symbol for the defects in human nature. The ways of the Wenhams and the Yahoos also connect to Benvolio and Tybalt from William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The Wenhams never resort to violence and instead are driven by reason and honesty, much like Benvolio. On the other hand, the Yahoos are always being violent, much like Tybalt's thirst for violence and revenge. The Wenhams come to a decision that Gulliver must leave the island, as caring for a Yahoo like this is unnatural. After returning home, Gulliver sees all humans as Yahoos. He becomes misanthropic as he rejects most human interaction. At the end of the novel, he has trouble integrating with people and even turns his back on his family for a long period of time. This is a climatic turning point as Gulliver becomes aware of the negatives of human nature. This displays the theme, the effects of human nature on society. This is a very important theme that Gulliver learns as he explores 4 different lands. All the people he encounters have different qualities which render their society defective. There are the Lilliputians, who lack principles and have a poor way of governing. There are the Brobdingnagians, who are narrow-minded and cannot advance in society. There are the Laputans, who are irrational and therefore have a society driven by fear and neglect. There are the Yahoos, who are barbaric and ignorant. They have no way of governing themselves and are always at war with each other. Lastly, there are the Wenhams, Jonathan Swift's ideal society. They are motivated by reason and honesty. This allows them to never have war or disagreement, a theoretically perfect society. Swift's satiric tone informs the reader of current issues. He uses satire to tell his opinion of society through characters, events, and politics in the lands that Gulliver travels to.